Hey everybody, well we're going to get started. Thanks a lot for coming. I hope you've had a great day so far and a great SharePoint conference. This is E-Ray, my name is Russell, and we're from the Office Developer Platform team, and we're here to talk to you today about building out really great app user experiences. Now one programming note, you can tweet your feedback during this session by using the hashtag SPC032, and you might even get featured in the demo in the later part of the presentation. So, but be kind.
It'll be a surprise. Okay, so what's this session all about? We're going to go and basically cover some of our principles and around how we thought about the UI for apps and provide a lot of tips and talk to you a lot about the resources that are out there for that you can go and use and build great looking apps. We're going to talk about it from the case of SharePoint, and then we're also going to cover it for the case of Office. And so just kind of to give you that overview, hopefully throughout the sessions that you've been seeing is that SharePoint cares a ton about its UI now, and Office too, of course. But if you looked at any of the keynotes around hey, look how fast and fluid things are. We're trying not to refresh. We're really trying to simplify things and bring things up for the user. All of that is kind of what we consider the heart and really making the end users happy for SharePoint. And so one of the traditional struggles that we've often seen that for any of us who've been building customizations for some period of time is how do we go and make sure that our customizations fit in nicely with the user experience, that they feel like a natural extension? How do we make sure that they get used? So, if you're selling to an IT department or you're selling to some BDM, they'll be hey, how do I, that's a great solution, but I don't think people are going to use it. Or, but by sticking with a lot of the UX guidelines and fitting in naturally, you'll have this great opportunity just to get, basically get equal footing to any of the features that are within the platform itself. Oops. Okay, and so that's that first one, is that it's really important to make sure that your apps feel like a natural extension. So we've, both across Office and SharePoint, we've invested a ton around styling and theming, around guidance and fonts, and everything like that, so that you can go and feel like a natural extension of it. And we'll be talking much more about that during the demos. The next one is just as a general thing. It's don't try to cram too much into your experiences. Just focus on doing a couple things really well. The end users have started to get more accustomed to that sort of a pattern and a paradigm. So, focusing down on just the task at hand will kind of help simplify both your development experiences as well as the end user experiences there. Okay? So I'm going to start with just a real quick demo to refresh everyone's mind of what are the major components of an app for SharePoint and some of the UI elements in particular that you can have at your disposal. So you're looking at over here. You're looking at a SharePoint site, and I'm going to go over to look at site contents. And so the user model that we have for our end users is that you have a site that's this destination that the end users go to, and you have these apps that make that site better. And so I'm going to go and show an experience around the UX demo app, which looks like I have to add it here. Oh, I think I actually have it in a different site, sorry. Oh, there it is, okay. And so what this app does is it goes and generates a simple tag cloud based off of a document in your site. And so this first experience that you're seeing is the launch experience. You've seen this a ton. So anytime that you're going to go and build out an app, you're going to have to go and do this. And there's a couple different techniques that we'll talk about around how to go and make sure that look and feel is consistent, that you can reuse all the themes that you have in your site, reuse all the fonts and whatnot. So to go back. The next thing I'll show is that apps can always bring commands with them. So for folks who've used custom actions before, that continues to hold true as something that's supported in the app model. So for example, if I wanted to go and generate a tag cloud based on this particular document, I can go and add a command to this menu and say, generate this particular tag cloud, and then actually have the capability of showing that as a dialogue, which is kind of a new capability for custom actions, as well as doing a full page navigate. In addition to adding commands to menus, you have the ability to add commands to ribbons too. And so I have a ribbon command here that will allow me to navigate out to an app to kind of a launched experience. Much like with custom actions in the past, you always have the ability to pass on any sort of context that you need. And I'll just round it out with the last little bit around showing app parts. And so much like previous experiences, you have you have the ability to go and specify parts that users can add on pages. And so apps can go and specify these parts and bring them along. And so, for example, I have my UX part here. And I can go ahead and add that. And in each of these cases, that theme and all that kind of that natural feel goes along with it. So that's just a really quick refresher, and we'll go into everything in a bit more detail and also how you actually go and build all these pieces. Okay, and so what you just saw again was that full page experience. There's an experience around parts, and there's an experience around commands. So digging into that full page now is, the thing that you'll have to go and do is figure out, so how do I get that sort of consistent Chrome on top? How do I get that look and feel to be the same and so that it feels like a natural extension of the site that it's hosted in? So there's two main options for you to choose from depending on where you want to go and host your content. If you're going to be hosting primarily in SharePoint, or you have, it's a SharePoint hosted app, you can go and use an app template. And this is a master page that's designed basically for apps. And it goes and has that whole Chrome experience, has all the right links up there, and it also trims things down a little bit, just so it's not kind of the full-on case. And so adding that will automatically give you any of the styles you need, and you can just go and whenever you're in Visual Studio and you're in a SharePoint hosted app and you create new pages, it'll automatically be referring to that. So it's pretty easy. The next one is to go and use the Chrome control. So this is going to be most used for provider-hosted apps or auto-hosted apps. And you can also use it for any HTML pages that are hosted within SharePoint. It's basically a client-side or a JavaScript control. And I'll go and show next how to go and actually use that. The Chrome control provides a couple of nice capabilities. So in addition to getting that sort of top nav, that top bar to go and make everything look correct, it also provides things like a customizable settings menu, so you can add commands, and then always has a link back to the host site. And so it's really easy to go and add this to your page. And I'll show you how to do that right now. Okay, so basically, what you're looking at here is I have an app that's cloud-hosted, or in this case, auto-hosted, and I have a couple of pages over here. And so in the main page that I have, you can see that the HTML side of the page is pretty straightforward. There's always a couple of references to the various script libraries you need. And then secondly, there's a placeholder, and that's how you specify where you want that particular Chrome control to go. Behind the scenes, there's a Chrome loader, which is basically the script that we use to go and one is to the first part of it that you're seeing here, is that what that does is whenever you go and launch an app, it passes a bunch of stuff on the query string, like such as, what's the title of that particular app in the site, what are the URLs that you need to navigate around, and then you can use that to start constructing useful URLs, such as links to CSS files, as well as links to JavaScript libraries that are hosted in the parent. The next piece over here is when it actually goes and renders that Chrome control. And so it replaces the particular div with this rendering. And you can see here some of the different options that you have around. You have the app icon. You have various links that you can go into. So let me go and show what that looks like in the browser real quick. And then I'll show doing a quick modification as well. Let me go back for a sec. Okay, let me go and do a quick redeploy just to make sure everything's working correctly. But just to kind of go through, basically there's a couple of specific pieces here around adding links, and let me go and start kicking that off. Let me check my network connectivity too. Okay, looks okay. Okay, well, while that's installing, after you've gotten that Chrome control on the page, the next thing that you get benefit of is that the Chrome control will automatically bring in any of the styles that you need for that particular site. And so I'll let that continue to run in the background while I go and switch back to the slides briefly. So SharePoint invested a ton in styles and themes this time around. And so you can go and reference that CSS file a couple of different ways. If you're on a SharePoint hosted page, we have controls that will automatically do that registration for you. Or if you're on a non-SharePoint hosted page, you can go and specify that link. And using that same JavaScript pattern that I've been talking about, that's how you can go and replace that host web URL based off of what you got from that query string. And so we've done actually a ton of documentation around all the right styles that you can use, and then we've also added a lot more semantics around our classes. So just to show some of the examples here, like basically we have examples for all the body text that you might want to use. We did have title and header styles, and so all of these cases will help you go and fit in naturally like you do with the rest of SharePoint. I'm going through this relatively quickly because it's documented online, but I do recommend checking this out. Okay, and continuing on, so on. Okay, so this is still under the process of deploying, and I'll go and show some other stuff while in the meantime. Okay. So I showed you that Tag Cloud app before, and as you might recall that when you go and actually launch that Tag Cloud, it goes and shows things all in the right themes. So let me go and show that. And behind the scenes, if you just look at the source of what that rendering looks like, you know, these are using all of those default styles as well as different colors that are commonly used within SharePoint. And so by using that set, what that gives you the benefit of is if you're in a themed site, your app will automatically look correct. So let me go to this theme site over here. And so SharePoint's investing a ton in theming, and so I have that same Tag Cloud app over here. And if I click on it, you'll see that that same exact app, that same exact set of code, now looks really different, and it looks like a natural extension of the site. And so that same pattern of referencing, using the Chrome controls, referencing the right classes and whatnot allows you to always fit in correctly, whether you're in the full page view, whether you're as a part, or whether you're doing any of the commands. So it's a pretty powerful thing to go and make sure that you look correct. Let me check on my deployment. Okay, it looks like it's still going. Okay, oh good, it's back. Okay, and then just kind of to round out the previous demo around the Chrome control that you saw before was that you get the navigation back, you have a title area, you pick up the styles automatically, and then you also get a settings link over here that is extensible. And so that settings link, or the set of links that show up there, are all just defined right there within the JavaScript. And so you can go and have any other links that you want and excuse me, have common commands. Okay. The next thing that we're working on right now, and we'll be releasing official guidance on this shortly, but I wanted to preview it a bit with the folks here, is that over the time, we've actually been seeing a lot of apps get built for the store already, and we've started to notice a bunch of common page patterns. And so the first one is basically what you'd almost consider the standard SharePoint page pattern, in which you have some amount of Chrome on top, left nav, and then some main content. So we're seeing this. We're also seeing another one that's pretty common with that same basic shape, but no navigation. And so when you're looking at building out your apps, trying to fit under these couple of patterns will probably just help people be familiar with your particular app. The next one that we're seeing is that data-centric apps, such as apps that were built in, say, Access, have this sort of a three-column pattern. If you've used Outlook, it feels similar to that notion as well, that you have a set of categories on the left-hand side. You have this sort of list selector in the middle, and then you have some detailed items on the right-hand side. And so that sort of three-column, multi-layer navigation is something that we've been seeing quite a bit too. And then lastly, we've also been starting to see some more standardization around the notion of a settings page. A lot of times when you're going to build out an app, there's some amount of configuration or settings that you're going to want to store. And then we're also going to have some guidance around this and what styles to use. So once we have all that guidance out, it'll just be in the form of, here are the right styles to use, and here are some example pages that you can go and follow. Okay. So that covers some of the main pieces of that full page experience. Next, I'm going to go and talk about how you can go and add app parts and some of the things that app parts support. One thing I do like to kind of call out, just because I know that a lot of folks have been doing web parts for a couple of years now, or at least some people maybe as much as 10 years, I think is when they first came out. But so there is the app parts themselves are very similar from a user experience perspective as web parts. In fact, they're implemented kind of on that same base framework. But the key difference is that they're always iframing in web content. And so the result of that is that currently they don't support the notion of a part-to-part connection. The guidance that or at least the patterns that we're seeing people do to work around that is usually around having some sort of a stored place to put the data. So whether that's on your server or somewhere in the parent web to go and pass data along and message that way. Okay. So let me go and switch back to the demo. When you're within Visual Studio, adding an app part's quite easy. All you have to go and do is, oops, let me stop this. All you have to do is just say add a new item. And then you can specify that you want an app part here. I'm going to create, and I'll call it client part 2. That's fine. And I'll click finish. And the thing that's pretty nice about it is you can go and specify whether you want to create a new page or an existing page. I'll create a new page in this case. And you'll see in the template right here is that it does that sort of chunk of script that I mentioned around creating the correct link to that default CSS. Because when you're in the context of an app part, you probably don't want the whole full Chrome in your little web part box. And then I'll just say, hello world demoing. Okay. And then once I've done that, this can now show up, and I'll show that's the first piece of it. And then that's the page, and then over in the SharePoint app part of the project, you'll see that there is now client web part 2. And if you look at the elements file here, it's a pretty simple experience. You'll see this pattern of just referencing a URL a bunch with a bunch of tokens to go and pass to the context of that part. And you'll also see that there's this section for properties. And so what parts are able to do is specify a set of declarative properties to go and use. So if I just grabbed this set of properties, you have a couple of different types. You can specify whether you want string properties, Boolean, integer, as well as enum. And then you can then reference all of these properties within the context of your part. I'm not going to do another deploy because it seems to be taking a little while, but I'll show you that in the example that I had before. So if I go and add a part to a page, this is showing the using that the tag cloud one. I'll add a page. I'm going to add a part. And this one I have a color changing part just to go and show you some of how that interaction would work. Is that basically, much like before, you have this part, and you can go and specify properties, and it's all done declaratively within that elements file. And so you can see here that they've specified an enum property with these different colors, and you can go and pick them, apply it, and then something went wrong. Go back. Okay, and then let me try that one more time. And so that part can go and I can pick red, which is my favorite color, and click apply. And then that part changes red. So you have the ability to go and reference those properties within the context of your app part. They basically just get passed along the query string. And so much like you would go and fetch any other properties off of a query string, those get passed along, and you can go and use them within the context of your part. Okay, and just kind of to show you that code again, it's all pretty simple to go and do, in which you just define a property and the type and what you want to go and display, and then you can go and add that property to this query string, and we'll go and handle all the token fix-up for you. Okay, the last thing I'll show relatively briefly is how to go and add custom actions. So custom actions are pretty nice just because it's one of, like app parts, it's a way for your app to reach out of that app web and impact the host web. The most common things that we usually see are like actions that you put on a document library, and I'll show you how to go and do that. And then, as I noted before in the previous demo, we've also added the capability to go and launch a dialog now. So that way, rather than always doing a full page navigate to go and perform some action, you can also go and just pop a dialog. Like I think one of our partners I saw did just, they do printing. And so you can go and just pop a dialog, say, print this document or print this set of documents, and just do those sorts of quick actions. Okay. So much like before, it's pretty straightforward, thanks to Visual Studio, to go and add any of these custom actions to your site. You can click New Item. You can specify whether you want it on the ECB, that's the little drop-down menu, or if you want it within the ribbon. So I'll say the ECB one. I'll go add it. And then in the next case, you can specify in what scopes do you want that particular command to show up. And so you can pick between content types or list templates. I'll pick a list template, and I'll pick the document library template. Click Next. And then what should I call this? UI demo. See link. And you can go and link it to any existing pages, as well as just external pages, too. And I'll click Finish. And so now you have a custom action defined in an elements file. So if folks have been using custom actions, that should look super familiar to you, that you can specify the registration type, which was a list. The registration type, which is a list, the particular list type, 101, happens to map to document library. The location, so that's the ECB or the edit control block. That's a little drop down. And then the sequence is what order it shows up in. So I can go and make this like 100, and it should show up on top. So I'll kick that off. and see. That's a little bit faster. It's going to do an uninstall. Okay, I'll show it on the side while we're continuing on. I created a separate one before, and if you look over, I didn't make it first and put it all the way at the bottom, and so you can have any old links that you want there. In order to go and make it a dialog, I'm going to cancel this. In order to make it a dialog, you just have to add 3 attributes to it, which are down here, and you can specify one that you want the dialog, what the default width and what the default height are, and so that way that's all you have to do to go and make it pop up in a dialog as opposed to a full page navigate. You have the same access to any of the tokens as well as any of the context stuff that you've used in the past, like list item ID, and so on. So you can go and actually build out pretty good experiences using that set of tools. The last little things before I'll go back is I'll talk a bit about the app manifest also. We have a couple of extra URLs that are available here too. So one is that settings URL that I mentioned previously. You can go and specify this within your app manifest. And what this will do is site contents. Actually, let me go ahead and actually try to deploy this again. Within your site contents page, anything that does have it, it would show up here as a settings link. And we also have a help link that we have that's available for you to set, and that will show up within this menu too. And so that way, if you look at just a random list, for example, you see that there's a settings link. And this is all about just getting that sort of consistency of user experience so that the users of your particular app will always know, like, hey, if I want to configure something, I go here. If I want to go and get help about this topic, I go here. And so that's kind of the goal that we were going after. So let's see. Looks like this got deployed again. And so I have that settings link. Let's hopefully. Maybe not. OK. So let me flip back. OK. And so that was kind of a really quick overview of some of the UI elements that you have at your disposal for SharePoint, as well as some of the things around like the code control and using styles. And so all of this stuff is, we're going to be continuing to document it online, so I definitely recommend checking that stuff out, and then also being active on the forums if you want to get more guidance on anything. So with that, Russell's going to talk all about apps for Office.
OK, thanks, E-Ray. That was great. So I'm going to switch right in also to some demos, and I'd like to show you some of the apps for Office. We had our interns in over the summer, and we had a bunch of them building apps for Office. And the key thing was that they used a design guide. So we worked closely with designers to come up with a really great design guide. And so I'll show you some examples of best practices first, and then we'll go a bit into the design guide itself. So let's say I'm writing a newsletter for my company on how SPC went. So I can use a great template here. And maybe I'll scroll to the bottom. And I'll click in the empty space, and let's say I have a Twitter app for Office. Now, you might have seen in some of the previous talks that we have 3 types of apps for Office. This is the type that's in a task pane. So let's go ahead and maybe search for a user. I know SPConf is a user that some of you are following, and we can see some of the tweets here. We can also try SPC032, cool. Oh, okay, let's find some fun comments here. When I first walked in the room, I tweeted a picture of the audience. So here we go. Here's my speaking advice. Just picture the audience naked, and I click here, and I can insert my picture. I just have to scroll down. I guess it's a bit big. And so this is really interesting as well. You can just type SPC12, let's say. So if you're writing a newsletter and you want to quote something someone said on Twitter about the conference, you can go and insert their quote there. Sorry, those ones are overlapping. But so what we wanted to call out here was in the app for Office, the specific things from the design guideline is this header space area here has the logo of the company and a bit of space. It's using a tab-based navigation. And as well, when you search for a topic, in this list, we have this contextual insertion experience, and also when you click Insert, you see a toast notification at the bottom. And we'll explain all this in a bit more detail. So let's try another. Let's say I'm writing a student report. I'm just grabbing some of the templates that Office offers from office.com. And I look at this. I was looking at it this morning. See egg, pupa, larva. So this seems to be something about metamorphosis. Hopefully I spelled that right. And let's try adding in Wikipedia app, which I'd like to learn more about. Now, a cool thing about this app is that you can actually auto-search. So just by selecting a word, Wikipedia is going to go ahead and search for that topic. And sometimes been a bit slow, but let's see. Try this one more time. Let's try that again. So select dog, and then I go back and select metamorphosis. Well, slight bug, I guess. But so what I wanted to show here was, again, this app has a header section at the top, so we don't get in the way of the navigation bar we've got here. The rest of this is built by the app developer, so they've got a search experience right at the front here. They've got a number of tabs, so you can switch between the different tabs for some information. Actually, resizing the tab will make the contents bigger. You also notice that we have a number of tabs here, just 3 of them, the 3 most popular ones. The other tabs fit in this truncated space. And then as well, when you do drag out, you'll see that content come into play eventually. So let's go down here and search some content. Section introduction. This looks like a cool picture here, so I'll try to insert it. And it's a bit big, but you get the idea, and you'll notice it comes with the citation here at the bottom. Citation, that reminds me of book reports I used to use, so let's go to a section here and open up a different app, the Encyclopedia Britannica Researcher app. This wasn't built by the interns, this was built by Encyclopedia Britannica themselves. But let's say, try this one more time. Metamorphosis. It worked. Okay, I think I was just selecting the content control instead of just the text. But wow, here's some great information about metamorphosis. So let's say I have just one section I want to insert here. You notice the command buttons at the bottom that are present that aren't scrolling out of way. They're always there. And then at the end, maybe I'll go into my bibliography section and click the Cite Works. So that's kind of a cool way to help me study and prepare my book report. Now, another app I'd like to show, this is a content app in Excel. So content apps actually go within the content, within the document, and they're going to print with the document. They get sent around inside it here. So this is a cool gauge one. And the one I liked about this one is it follows one of the principles we're going to go over, which is do one thing but really, really well. So this is a just super simple app that you can resize. It really just does these gauges, but that's what I like about it. So let's say my sales in Europe have gone up. You can see my gauge go up and go back. And really, all you're doing is you're just changing the data cells, and that's it. You can maybe change some colors here, and the settings goes away. So this is a really cool app, but it's really simple. I might have hidden these control buttons, so they only show up when you're hovering over. But otherwise, I think it's a really cool app. Another app I'd like to show was made by the folks over at Bing. It's a Bing map app. And this one's really cool because obviously If you're trying to map, let's say, a list of customer addresses in Excel, you're going to want to do that in the map, but rather just have the map blank right when you insert it. This one just has this really helpful hero experience where it actually just gives you some sample data which you can insert right away. You can make this into a table, change any of the values you want, and you can see them go on, get the map just the way you like it. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe you could even save that as an image so that when you send it to someone, no matter what happens with their internet connection, it will send as a saved image, and then they can go and just reactivate that. So that's another cool app. And then finally, I wanted to show you in Outlook, we also have mail apps. So these ones are cool. Let's say someone's sending me, or I'm sending myself, some instructions on how to get to the party tonight. There's a party at Luxor, but my talk is at Mandalay Bay. I can go here into the Bing Maps app box. It says it's found some addresses, and this is really cool. So there's 2 addresses in this, obviously. We're not just going to show one map, but this gives you a really easy experience just to click back with a back button up at the top and just switch between the addresses. This one has a bar at the bottom, taking advantage of some of the space there, so you can have links to view the larger map on Bing, get directions, and this map is also really interactive. So one thing I think you'll find in common about a lot of these apps is they just do one thing really well. They try to get all the navigation and Chrome and extra settings out of the way and just do the one thing really well. So that's what I was trying to get across there. So now we'll go into a bit more detail about some of the things you saw. So as a quick recap, you saw the 3 app shapes for Office, the content apps, the task pane apps, and the mail apps. So the content app, it's embedded within the document. It's a part of it. You can print the image with it. So if you print the whole spreadsheet, you won't lose it, even though it's web connected. You can resize it, move it, copy and paste it. The user's in full control. And an image is being captured all the time, unless the developer explicitly says not to. Let's say if it's a banking app, you don't want any images taken. But the user can also save as an image if they want to send it to someone, and just be sure that this looks the way it did when I created it, let's say if it's a stock price or something like that. And the developer sets the default size for when the user inserts one. One thing I wanted to note about content apps is set an appropriate size. So because you can set the size, if your content is actually this big, don't let it insert this big. It's a really easy property to set in the manifest, but you're going to end up with these internal scroll bars. And there's really no content in Excel that scrolls internally like this. And also when we take the image, you're going to miss all this content. So if it's this big, just make it that big, and that's how you set the requested width and height. Now, task pane apps, as you saw, are in the task pane. They do actually save with the document if you've got it open, and you send the task pane with the document, send the document to someone. That task pane is going to stay there with all the bindings you've set, all the connections. But if you exit out, close it, get rid of it, it won't. So that's a bit different there. And these apps are really great for just providing some reference information. Maybe a one-time thing, or maybe it's relevant to the whole document rather than a specific section. And it's great, so it's always there at the side of your application, and you can always use it to insert things, translations, another big one, any sort of scenarios like that. And with these, you can actually just grab the task pane by the top header, rip it off, and dock it to the left side or the right side. You can actually just undock it so it floats outside of the application. And those open at a standard 350 pixel default size, which means you have, with the Chrome around the outside, 320 pixels. So you want to make sure when you're developing your app that it starts at that width and looks great. And finally, the mail apps you've seen. These are in Outlook and Outlook Web App, Mobile Outlook Web App. And their intention is to remain unobtrusive. So you'll actually just see that top bar which will fill up with any apps. If we detect that apps are applicable to, let's say if you have an address in the mail, then you'll see those sorts of apps. But those are meant to open up and close and get out of the way when they're not needed. And there's a minimum height of 32, a max of 450 pixels, but you can set a height in between there that works best for your app. Also, if you have a different page that's customized just for the tablet or the phone, you can actually in the manifest specify that HTML page, which you'd be hosting in addition to the regular one, and the height that you'd like those to open up at. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about navigation patterns, and these come straight from the design guide, which is on dev.office.com, and you can go read this yourself. So I won't go into a ton of detail on each of these, but I want to make sure you're aware because choosing the right navigation pattern for your app helps the user focus more on the content and on the tasks they're performing than on, okay, this is a new app made by a new company. How do I figure out how to move around and do things, and where's the settings on this one? So we're starting off with the tab pattern, which you saw on the Twitter and Wikipedia apps. And again, you're going to want to make sure that the tabs don't wrap around, just truncate them with the ... and you can have a drop-down menu to get to those tabs and keep the most important stuff to the left. Search, like in the Wikipedia or the dictionary apps, is a great way users can quickly search and get to content. And by keeping it right there at the top, if it's prominently displayed, you really help the user understand that search is the primary means or a primary means for getting content. You can even provide default content, like if you go to Wikipedia sometimes, they provide the article of the day or something like that. List is a very common thing we see, and you see it again with Twitter, tweets and other things like that. Typically, they'll link to a detailed view, so clicking on one item will go to a detailed view where you can see it bigger, see more information. And tabs are great on these sorts of lists to, instead of having a ton of scrolling, you can actually just filter by using tabs, or you can group things into subgroups with headers, like the different sections in a Wikipedia article that start off mostly collapsed. Scrolling and paging. So again, in the examples I showed, it was really critical that the insert buttons at the bottom didn't get scrolled out of view. That's really important, as well as the header. And if you have horizontal style content apps or mail apps, which are always horizontal style, instead of having a horizontal scroll bar, we find it's a lot better to have paging. It's just a better user experience. As far as text, and a lot of the apps we've seen for task pane apps and narrow content apps, one column's fine. It's really great when the user wants to expand the app that your content reflows, and so text maybe fills up a larger part, and we saw that with the Wikipedia app. But at a certain point, having to read a line of text that's really way too long is almost distracting, so you just want to break into a second column at that point. This is another example we show. This could be used for, say, the Wikipedia app, but if you have really, really large bodies of text, rather than having this really long scroll bar that the users have to get through, you can just have subsections that are collapsed by default. And so within the space that the task pane provides, it's just a better user experience, helps users get around faster and feel like they're in control. I mentioned detailed views. So again, they focus the user on the selected content. And then if you do want to, you can have a lightweight button for insertion, also a lightweight button for returning to the previous view. So in this example, we've got just a back button. And that's always great, just to let the user get back if that wasn't the object they were looking for. Avoid having really long, detailed breadcrumb trails. And in fact, for navigation, it's best to have no more than 2, maybe 3 levels of hierarchy. So the original list, the detailed view, maybe one more view if you need it. But if you do have very rich hierarchy, don't bother having just a huge breadcrumb trail of every different page you can go back to. Just keep using back buttons. It's a lot better. We saw this in the Twitter example, so this is contextual UI. So if you don't want to have an insert button at the bottom that's always there in a footer taking up a bit of space, you can have an insert button that shows up contextually when you hover over an object or when you click to insert. Yes, this works as well for tiles and for expanding sections. I mentioned this as well, but commands at the footer are great. Make sure they don't scroll out of view. And a lot of people are using this as kind of a primary command surface when there's one thing that you're always going to want to do in your app. Dialogues is an interesting one. So we've been trying to limit the number of dialogues, and actually you'll just see this the way Office and Microsoft are going with modern design patterns, that you don't want to have multiple windows all popping up in your face. If you have to have a dialogue in your app for Office where you really want to stop the user, demand a response, keep in mind you're going to be taking them out of their flow and out of their immersive experience, but sometimes you need it. So feel free to just throw up a div, dim the container behind it, and demand a response before continuing. And this is a big one we've seen, especially with the Wikipedia sort of book report app, that when you are inserting content, it's really easy to, and great idea to include a reference to the app, include a reference to the original content on the web, and make that a link so people can get back there. Loading's another one, so you're going to want to do loading whenever you're doing these asynchronous calls out to the web. Don't bother just throwing the loading indicator over top of whatever is there. You can just kind of white out the whole content and then show the loading indicator. It's a lot cleaner, and we've seen it's a bit less distracting. And as well, if you have notifications, so any notifications in App for Office that come from the system are going to drop down from the top and then go away. And that's also, as I mentioned in a later slide, while we encourage you to leave any critical controls out of that space. So you should just have we call them toasts because they pop up from the bottom. And so you can keep the user, every time there's a background process going on, you've performed a task, there's an error, just have a toast pop up from the bottom, and a really easy way to dismiss it, or also just have it disappear after a few seconds. And as I showed quickly in the demo, there is host UI. So in the upper right corner, when the user is interacting inside of the app, there will be a menu and a button that we put up there. So you should avoid having the top of your scroll bar up there because it can get overlapped sometimes. And this is what I mentioned about the errors and status that come from the system. Sometimes if it's not as critical, you'll just see a collapsed message in the very top corner, and clicking it will expand it to show the full message, which is then dismissible. And sometimes if we really need to, we'll expand it automatically. So again, that's why you want to keep critical stuff out of that top section. I'm not going to read all these numbers. But we do want to let you know a little bit about margins. So what we found that's important about margins is make them consistent. These are numbers that we've measured and we know that are good. It saves you from having to go and vend out to a designer. You can just follow these numbers. But margins, keep them consistent. So if you have a very constant silhouette with the same margins around the outside, the chrome of your app with the content inside being the only thing that's moving, it does really limit the distractions. So this is for task pane apps, content apps, and again for mail apps. And that's in the design guide that's on dev.office.com. As far as typography, Sego UI is the font that we use in Office 2013 and Windows 8. We think it's really great, and we'd encourage you to use the fonts so that your apps really feel like they belong and they're a part of the Office experience. Use scale in typography to create hierarchy, obviously with headers and subheaders, but we really recommend that if you have one view, you shouldn't have more than 3 font sizes in one view. And they should be noticeably different in size. So one really big header, one medium-sized subheader, and smaller for the other content, and reuse the medium and the small throughout. We do provide a CSS file with typography and a lot of the coloring and different styling. It's called, I believe, office.css. And it is when you're in Visual Studio creating an app for Office or the Napa experience and you just do a file new, we're actually going to include the CSS file in that project and put it in the header file, which you can go ahead and remove if you want, but we'll automatically, with no work on your behalf, we'll get you started with the great fonts that we recommend using. As well, we're going to be providing just standard glyphs and icons. And what we recommend here is that if there's a command that's going to be used often, use an icon. And that way, even if it's not obvious, the user will learn it through repeated use, and that'll save you a bit of space. Otherwise, if it's something that's occasional use, just use a button with text in it and the word insert or something like that. Use actual text for that button. And you saw it in some of the demos, but it helps users. Sometimes they're scared if they don't know what the icon is to click on it. Color's great, so definitely meaningfully and consistently use color in your app. Emphasize headings with color. And if you have color to denote a certain action, like a hyperlink, just make sure you don't use that color in other places when there's no hyperlink. So be consistent with action colors. And then for branding, we're really encouraging your company, whatever you're making, put branding in there, put the logo in there in the top, and go ahead and carefully use typography and color and graphics to make the app feel like it's coming from you. And yeah.
Okay, and I think that's pretty much what we wanted to cover. So, like we both said, we have a bunch of these design guidelines in a pretty detailed way, both from like a set of tables of like what fonts to use, what styles to use, as well as a more of like a text form of it of like, hey, while you're going out and designing your app, here are some of the things to consider at each step along the way. So the URL to get to that is dev.office.com, and there's a link kind of in the lower left-hand side of the page that says UX guidelines. And so definitely check that out. I think they've been saying this at just about every single session, but if you are interested in building an app, especially for the Office and SharePoint stores, please fill out one of these cards, and you can come get a card right after the session if you have any ideas. The program managers across our respective teams are going to be doing one-on-one sessions basically all day tomorrow and all day Thursday. And so if you want kind of just some one-on-one time with, say, like me or Russell and want some ideas for your app or want feedback on your architecture or anything, we're happy to help, but you need to let us know and fill out a card. And so with that, I think... Yeah, but when you get a chance, please fill out any evaluations, and thank you very much for attending.